Welcome to the forum to mark World Wetlands Day, held each year on the 2nd of February. This year's theme is Wetlands Action for People and Nature, calling on us to value, manage, restore and love wetlands. We would like to acknowledge our funding sponsors and partners who enable us to deliver our events program. Events held by the Wollonga Environment Centre and the Greater Adelaide Environment Network are supported by the Hills and Fleurieu and Northern New York's Landscapes Boards, with funding from South Australian Government's Landscapes Priority Fund and Green Adelaide. Wollonga Environment Centre are proud to partner Sustainable Onkaparinga to deliver events in the Onkaparinga Council region. We also acknowledge and thank Peter Laffin from Aldinga Washpool and Silver Sands Heritage Group for helping organise this event. I would like to ask Carl Winder Telfer to welcome us to country. Thank you, Carl.
I just said greetings to spirit, in spirit, to everybody. We can't do welcome. I've never done a welcome. Because we have no country to welcome anyone to, but we're here now, and that's what we're talking about, is the understanding of what the spirit of place means for us. And that spirit of place comes from my mum's words, and everyone knows her fight, especially for trying to protect our sacred country, and her being the senior woman of water, Yanki Breka Mikui, and her granddaughter is now stepping into that space. I guess it's important for me to be here with you fellows. So I greet you in the spirit of humanity and in the spirit of our human family. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Our format today is that each of our presenters will have 10 minutes to tell their story, with 5 minutes after each one for questions and comments. Let's get underway with Emily Zhang, a project officer with Conservation Volunteers Australia, which is heavily involved in wetland care throughout the country. Emily is leading the Revive Our Wetland project at Barker Inlet and will introduce us to the idea of World Wetlands Day and her own project. Thanks, Emily.
Great. Well, thank you, Janine, for the warm introduction. Nice to meet everyone here. So, like she said, I'm the project officer at Conservation Volunteers Australia. We are a national organisation focused on bridging people with nature, and this is actually our 40th year. And I've been with Conservation Volunteers for about just over 5 years. And now I'm one of the project officers around the country delivering the Revival Wetland project, which is funded by Siobhan Australia. And I'm here, thank you, Peter, for inviting me to talk about the World Wetland Day that we had earlier last month. And yeah, there you go. Okay, so just a little bit of history. So the World really marks the date of the adoption of the Convention of Wetlands on 2nd of February in 1971. And it is one of the oldest, I think is the oldest modern intergovernmental environmental agreements. And Australia, I believe, has over 2,000 or 2,400 Ramsar. I'm sorry, not Australia. In total, there are over 2,400 Ramsar sites across the world. And here in Australia, we're home to about 60 to 65 Ramsar wetlands, covering over 80,000 square kilometers. So a lot of land, and it is just a really good thing to see governments, people, communities, cultures coming together to recognize and to appreciate this wetland. And the wetland that we're working on, wetlands, way that we see it, wetland really globally is losing ground so fast that in a way, rainforests receives a lot of attention because there are cute animals in there. There are documentaries made about rainforests, but wetlands, in a sense, relatively in comparison, are not as well known to the public. And we felt like there is a need in our society today to bridge people and to link people to wetlands. And without the better way to do it is to use some statistics. So every time we have events with our volunteers, we introduce them to wetlands. A little bit of housekeeping, really, like talking about the difference between blue and green carbon, talking about what kind of wetland systems that we have in Australia here today, and what are some of the challenges that they're facing. And today, the biggest challenge really is the losing of wetlands. They're just so fast, and mostly due to deforestation and due to development. And here on Ghana land, it is really the same. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that I'm here today at Ghana land, and we really pay respect to the custodians and the leaders of our culture, and they are the Ghana people. All right, so wetlands here on Ghana land today. The event that we ran on the 8th of February to commemorate a World Wetland Day was on Ghana land, and we really faced a lot of difficulties. Just where are some of the symbolic or the traditional wetlands that we still have today in Adelaide? And it was such a difficulty. We were talking with the Ghana elders, we talked with councils, and he ended up looking at these two very different maps. The one that you have on the left is an illustration of forests and woodland of Adelaide Plains in the 1830. And this one was made by Planning SA's Urban Forest Diversity Program. And then on the right of the screen, what you have is a land cover satellite map, where you can just see this. I know on the one on the left is not very clear. I do have the much more better PDF that we could share later with everyone via email probably. But you can see there are different types, many different types of habitats that used to be in the Adelaide Plains, on the Adelaide Plains. And today, very few remains, especially near the metropolitan area, and which is, in a way understandable because of urban development, of mostly just housing and all kinds of things. But if you could follow my cursor, this little strip, that's kind of the remaining mangroves. And over here, that's the kind of the St Kilda mangrove forest is around that area, in comparison to what they in the 1830s, where you have a much larger strip. And over here, the grayish area, they are supposedly the samphire habitats, where today it's almost non-existent anymore. So really had a problem. We wanted to do some good for the wetlands, but we had a problem finding wetlands. And eventually, we partnered up with the Port Adelaide Infield Council and also Green Adelaide on this continuation of the Bring Back the Yellowish Sedge Skipper Butterfly project. So this project was initially started by the Green Adelaide. It used to be called the Natural Resource Management Board. And so we thought it would be a good thing to start linking people, to start bridging this gap, letting people know what is happening in our own backyard, in our own wetlands. And the sites that were chosen after discussions with Green Adelaide and with the Port Adelaide Infield Council was the Barker Inlet wetland. And the Barker Inlet wetland, not really well known. It's a huge wetland. Really, it is a huge wetland. It covers over 172 hectares.
just by walking along, because the construction of this wetland is not so great, so it will take you hours, and like almost 5 to 6 hours if you ever want to do, a walk in this wetland. But we formed so this wetland is man-made. It's constructed wetland, including is part of the constructed wetland, including the Greenfields and connector wetlands at Southbury, plus the Range and Magazine Creek, which is a sister wetland, so call it. And what it does is really receives all the stormwater from Prospect, Port Adelaide Infield, and Adelaide Council, and they become almost like the last barricade before this runoff stormwater actually goes into the St. Vincent Gulf or the Port River and the bigger oceans. So they're really important. And when we got to the wetland, it was just overwhelming that there's just so much resource there. There's a lot of aquatic birds, a lot of habitat. It is home to Rakali. I think someone is actually one of the Adelaide University students is starting to do a Rakali research at Barker Inlet. And we're just finding a lot more than what it really meets to the eye. And because this wetland really situated at the back of the industrial suburbs of Gilman and Dry Creek, really it isn't that well known. And the Port Adelaide Landfill Council have been doing a lot of work. The construction of this one, I believe, was said to be about $10 million, and the council is fighting on a yearly basis to find funding and to continue to maintain and to create a more recreational friendly wetland for people to know, to come and enjoy, to understand, and to connect with the wetland environment. And so the project that we're doing, frozen. Okay. So the project we're doing, we used World Wetland Day as a project in launch day, where we had Tamara Smith from the Deadly Mob, who gave us a really amazing welcome to country and smoking ceremony. It was interactive. We talked about what happened, what they used to do on wetlands, the Ghana culture. Also touched base on how the Ghana people is really looking forward to taking a step out with everyone, with the modern mainstream culture, as you call it. And so Tamaru was amazing, had this amazing ceremony with the smoking ceremony. Those of you who haven't tried it, I think is really a very special moment. So apart from that, on the day, we also did a biodiversity tour with the Port Adelaide Infant Council. So two of their council officers came out. The one on the right, his name is Danny Milbank. Anyone who's really worked with the Port Adelaide and the council on wetlands or coastal project probably know him. He's just this very, really hardworking and knows the habitat really well. He looks after all of the wetlands within the Port Adelaide district, and we work with him very closely. And that is him. The photo of me is him touching a Ghana film, which is the host plant, also the breeding plant for a yellowish sedge skipper, and that will be one of the most important vegetation that we try to reintroduce in our projects later this year with the Port Adelaide Landfill Council. And the photo on the left is the group of volunteers that came out on the day. We're just really enjoying some of the bird life, and with the bird surveyor of the Port Adelaide Landfill Council. His name is Chris Evans, not the movie star Chris Evans, but he's more like, we call him the bird guy, Chris Evans. Everyone got out the binoculars, start looking at birds. We're talking about the increase of different bird species that Chris has seen in the recent years. on the wetlands here, a lot more of migratory birds starting to kind of venture inland rather than staying close to the coast. As I think is a way of saying that once the habitats are being brought back, then the animals start to return as well. And it's just a good moment for people to starting to see, behind the bushes, behind the not so sometimes not like it was in summertime, so not so green habitat, there's still amazing animals to be found. And that was our day on the Wetland for the World Wetland Day, really a day to appreciate, to a long-term event to appreciate wetlands, to trying to merge both the Ghana culture and also with our volunteers who may not know that well about traditional owners and their relationships to wetlands. And yeah, so our next event also happens to be on Barker Inlet. We have the Margaret Brody, who is a Ghana elder. Her family is actually going to be leading on our Women on Countries Day, and we'll be doing some storytelling, some story sharing, and also traditional weaving activities. And although it is a day for International Women's Day, but everyone is welcome to join. I think International Women's Day really is a day to kind of recognize achievements of women. It doesn't say because you're a different gender you shouldn't come. It's definitely not like that, and we'll welcome everyone if you're interested, and also a chance to come to Barker Inlet wetland to have a look of this magnificent kind of like hidden gem wetland in Adelaide. And that is me.
Does anybody have any questions for Emily? All is quiet? Okay, well, thank you very much, Emily. That was a very good presentation. Our second speaker is Professor Beverly Clark from Flinders University, who's familiar to some of us through her work in the 2000s with the Onkaparinga Council on measuring the social and economic impacts of cars on beaches. Bev is a geographer, is keenly interested on how environmental policy is made. Her work on researching community engagement for coastal management and climate change is widely recognised. She'll tell us about recent work on coastal wetlands restoration north of Adelaide.
So thank you so much for inviting me to come to this important little forum this afternoon. I'm very privileged to come and talk to you about some research that was conducted here at Flinders University. And I should acknowledge a master's student, Onkotet, who contributed largely to helping collect some of the data. He's now returned to Myanmar. So I'm going to talk to you about this project that was finished in about 2019. So it's a small piece of empirical research about the cultural values of some coastal wetlands north of the city of Adelaide, and Emily provided a bit of a background about the parcel of that site. So I just need to make sure that I'm working here. First of all, I think I just need to impress upon everybody that when I'm talking about culture, I'm talking about it in its widest sense. So I'm mindful that often when we talk about culture in Australia, we think about Indigenous culture, and quite rightly we should. But in the context of this particular study, I'm thinking about the cultural values and worldviews of society at large. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that people come to their particular belief systems with a training in worldviews that we're not even really very aware of. We hold particular values and beliefs, but we don't necessarily drill down and think about why we think the way that we do. And drawing attention to people's worldviews has a lot of value, I shouldn't use the word value, has a lot of benefit in getting people to recognise that we don't necessarily all think about things and places the same as one another. And it can be a great way of drawing people's attention to different ways of framing and thinking about the world. So the project site that I'm talking about today spans the 70 kilometres of coast north of the city of Adelaide. So it takes in a big span of a zonation of mangroves, seagrass and salt marsh. And this is a really important community. It's some of the best representations of salt marsh anywhere in Australia. And I think Emily was saying we lost quite a lot of that, particularly around the Barker Inlet area. But there are some really fabulous intact parcels of coastal wetland north of the city of Adelaide. And that's partly because some of it's been locked up in mining leases. The public haven't had access to parts of this particular coastal landscape. So it's important for diversity of species, but also resident and migratory birds that travel, thousands of kilometres to roost and feed in this particular habitat. So it's an important part of our South Australia's coastline. So while it's got very high biodiversity status and is really important and has great representation of species and varieties of wetland, it also is suffering a series of threats. And you can see the images on the screen there. Off-road vehicle access is a big problem that leaves big scars on the coastal wetlands, hard to recover. Vandalism is a big issue, dumping of waste, pollution both from agricultural sources and also from the marine environment are a problem. And we've highly modified this landscape. There's quite a lot of industrial activity. And in terms of setting up those evaporation salt pans, we've stranded quite a lot of the salt marsh from tidal flow. So while it's very important for plants and species and habitat value, it's also a highly threatened landscape. And I'd just like to acknowledge that the little project I'm going to talk to you about is part of a bigger project that run through funding from the Goyder Institute. And my colleague here at Flinders, Sabine Dittman, was and is running ongoing research that's looking at the potential of opening up tidal flows to part of this previously stranded coastal wetlands. And I have to say the results are really astonishing. The capacity of this site to recover and repopulate is really quite phenomenal. I've had a look at some aerial photographs since the bund wall has been broken and the tide has been able to come and go from this parcel of coast. The results are really promising. And there's ongoing funding for blue carbon, state government funding to progress that work. So that's very exciting. So you may be familiar with the concept of ecosystem services, and the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment identified 4 kinds of services, and coastal wetlands are really important in offering all 4. So provisioning services, supporting, regulating, and cultural services. And I'm going to focus the rest of the talk thinking about what we mean by cultural service, because that was the point of the little piece of research that I'm going to present to you now. So when we're talking about cultural services and thinking about things that are difficult, they're not necessarily tangible. They might mean something to us spiritually. We might appreciate things for their aesthetic value. We might learn things from the ecosystem around us, and we go and do things. We are in place and receive wellbeing benefits from these services. So they're culturally framed, if you like. And the basis of this project was that we wanted to find out from communities adjacent to these northern wetlands, north of Adelaide, how they experience them. Do they visit them? What do they do when they visit there? And then try and work out the kinds of benefits that are derived from this particular coastline. So we went about it in a couple of ways, because it's not necessarily an easy place to access people. So if you've been out that way, you know that the main arterial road out of Adelaide runs parallel to the coast. There's few access roads running from the Port Wakefield Highway down to that coastal environment. Nevertheless, we delivered 500 questionnaires, hard copy questionnaires, to households within 3 local government areas adjacent to that coastline, both those that were on the same side as the coast of the highway, and then 2 suburbs that were away from the coast on the other side of the highway. We tried to also find people online, so it's possible that some of you might have completed the survey, and thank you if you're one of those people. We tried to find networks that were interested in bird watching, recreational fishing, 4-wheel driving, motorbike clubs, all kinds of social groups that might access that parcel of coast to find out how they experienced that particular place. So we got a very wide geographical spread of responses through that online questionnaire, as well as a cluster of people who live and reside in the region. And we were particularly interested in how familiar people were with this particular piece of coastline, and found out that 40% of the people who responded went there at least weekly, and 85 people had been at least once in the previous year. So we had some confidence that of the 89 responses that we got, people knew about the place we were asking them questions about. And this is the most important slide of the talk, really. So when we're thinking about culture and cultural services and the wellbeing benefits that people derive from places, it's very difficult. They're not necessarily tangible concepts. And I found this framework by some researchers in the UK, a guy called Church, and he has a colleague, Fish, and they have published a number of articles using the framework that you can see on the screen before you. At least I hope you can see the screen in front of you. And they had this really nice way of explaining the dynamic interchange between people's experience of being in a place and what they derive, the benefit that they derive from that. So let me just explain the diagram to you. So we have the physical domain being the coastal wetlands. So this is the environmental space that people go and visit. And when they visit, there's certain things that they do when they go there. And being in a place and interacting or doing things there helps derive some kind of benefit from that interaction of being in place and doing something. So this dynamic model says, okay, well, the space is a setting where things happen. It could be a place, a landscape, or an ecosystem. So we've defined our space as being that 70 kilometres of coast. The practices we are taking as the actions that people take or the things that people do when they're in that space. And the benefit is a thing that accrues from the intersection of being in place and doing something. So hopefully that's clear to you. And I'll talk about the three kinds of benefits that derive from that interaction on the next slide. No, I got rid of that slide because I thought I'd run out of time. I'll go back to this one. So the benefits that accrue are things like identity, experience, and capabilities. That's how Church and Fish describe a cultural ecosystem benefit emerging from being in a place and doing something when you're in that place. So identity is a sense of belonging, a sense of place, of spirituality, and being anchored to a place. So you have some kind of identity with the particular environment that you're visiting. The benefit might also be about the experience that emerges from you being in a place and doing something. So you might be inspired to paint something, you might feel tranquil and rested, you might feel like a sense of discovery, but you have some kind of experiential outcome from being in the place and doing something. Or you might develop a capacity. So you might be educated and know something, you might be able to have a better level of judgment about a place, you might work in a place, you might also be more healthy. So these are the kinds of ways that these two researchers have described this dynamic process of being in a place, doing something, and achieving a cultural ecosystem benefit. So we framed our results according to this particular model and came out with some very interesting findings, because we wanted to be able to say to the government that people really value this coastal wetland, but we wanted to show how. And I think that this model provides a really good solid basis for an explanation of what this cultural benefit is and how it's derived. So we asked people when they visited these coastal wetlands what they did when they got there. And you can see from this graph that there's an enormous number of different things, activities that people participate in. I think it's really interesting that some of the most often cited ones were just being there and looking at that environment that was around them. So that scenic appreciation was the highest recorded activity, which really says something. I should say that the representation of people who were probably environmentalists was much greater than people who might have activities that have greater impact. So we didn't really get the responses that we wanted from four-wheel drive users or fishers and things like that. So we've got a bit of a bias in our survey. But I think it's still interesting that people acknowledge this range of different things that they do. So a range of different practices are carried out in those coastal wetlands north of the city of Adelaide. And then we asked a series of questions. We gave people a series of phrases and asked them to rate them in terms of importance to themselves. So the questions or the phrases that we put to people were about the space of these wetlands. Phrases like, the coastal region provides for knowledge about education, history or nature. The coastal region encourages healthy living. The coastal region develops a sense of community. You can see the kinds of things that we were asking people to identify. And across those phrases, people tended to rate them as being either very important or important. So these things about the spaces of these coastal wetlands, people ranked very highly. So sense of freedom, places that enhance attachment, provide places for people to meet. So these are rated very highly. Well, what does that mean? We aligned these phrases with those cultural benefits, and you can see that all three benefits of identity, experience and capability are addressed by the phrases that we put to people, and that they have identified these things as being very important. So I guess the point that I'm making here is it is possible to research and seek from people what their cultural ecosystem service benefits are. They can articulate them, and I think that this is an important thing to be able to measure, and we've achieved that through this phrasing. We also applied those phrases to people's personal opinions and experiences, and you can see that that phrasing has become individualised here. So the coastal region has places I enjoy visiting, it helps generate good memories for me, it fosters a sense of pride in me, it's a region where I go to reflect. So we changed it from being just a general kind of statement to something personalised. And it similarly, we got these ratings of things being very important, down to not so important. So not so many people were working in this region, but it was somewhere that people very much enjoyed visiting, that it generated memories, it helped people relax and so forth. And again, these phrases we can categorise according to whether people's identities are formed through this experience they have when they go there, whether they have good experiences and whether they develop capabilities or not. So again, it's a way of showing a measure of cultural value against a series of concepts, if you like. And finally, we asked people to put some qualitative answers in there. And by looking at their own personal expression about some of the questions we asked, you again can see that people have an identity or an experience or a capability kind of ecosystem benefit, which are really powerful. So one person said, I've lived at Parham for almost 40 years. I love the whole coastline, the changing seasons, bird life, fishing and crabbing. I visited the beaches with my parents who are no longer here. I have many memories to share with the next generation for them to enjoy. So for this person, it's a real sense of their personal identity. They draw on memories and they want to share it with future generations. So that's a great example of the benefit to that person. Another said, I feel at home under the open bowl of the sky, listening to the birds squelching in the mud and not hearing another human being or human activity in the entire soundscape. It's what makes the metropolitan area bearable for me. So this person really, those words are very experiential. Their feeling of the mud between their toes, the lack of other human noises, it's very experiential. So that benefit for that person of being in that place is really powerfully explained in that quote, I think. And then finally, someone expressing that capability benefit, increased involvement over the past 3 years with ongoing surveys and volunteer activities has endeared this wonderful and unique environment to me. There's such diverse beauty in these areas any time of year, and the scope of birds, wildlife and fauna is captivating. So that is another really clear expression that for this person, their benefit is derived from them being a volunteer, learning things and having this different perception of the place. So I think that there are 3 quotes that support the ideas I've been trying to express to you. So I'm going to just draw that to a conclusion here. I think it's really important to be aware that this 70 kilometres of coast, much of it has a reputation of being wasteland. Even though scientists and ecologists and people who have a profound interest in the environment, much of the community just see it as a place to go and dump rubbish, do wheelies, do clandestine things because it's a bit out of eyesight of the police and the rest of society. So that's a reputation that needs to be overcome, really, in terms of environmental and coastal restoration. But our survey has shown that it is perceived and reported by the people who contributed to our survey as contributing to their human wellbeing in very significant ways. They were able to articulate that and agree that these things were of importance to them. I think the survey has also confirmed that the concept of naturalness, being somewhere natural and away from other humans, is also highly valued. Most of the people that we were talking to had visited this place, so visiting is really important in order to generate this connection to place, but that comes as a double-edged sword because access and visitation comes with certain impacts. And as I was explaining at the start of the talk, part of the reason that many of these parcels of wetlands are intact is precisely because people haven't had direct access to them. So we have a challenge of allowing people in and encouraging development, because that's really important for our state economy and for these regions to thrive, but we have to think about then how we offer protection to some of these very delicate landscapes. And I think that this is really just the start of something in terms of capturing people's perceptions and measuring cultural value in this way. So I hope that you found it interesting. Really, it's just the starting of research around trying to measure this concept, which is quite intangible. So thank you for inviting me along, and I'm happy to try and defend any questions.
Have we got any questions out there?
Yeah, Bev, that was fascinating. I've done some interviews with people. These happen to be Christians who actually have mental health problems, and they find being in nature incredibly healing. So I think that's something that really needs to be noted, and particularly in these days with so much trauma going on. So thank you.
I think it's really interesting because I've seen a number of things recently, like nature bathing and lots of programs directed at children to get them out into the environment. And I think it's something that's very, on one hand, it seems really obvious because it's just really nice most of us really enjoy being in beautiful places. I think the challenge for the coastal wetlands is that it takes an educated aesthetic for quite a lot of us, because unlike some of the wetlands in the Northern Hemisphere, our wetlands take they look like they're homogenous. Don't automatically realise that species diversity. So it was interesting for me that people who go there and live in that community have expressed their appreciation of it in the way that they have.
Good.
I just wanted to ask something. I was just looking at, it was great to hear all of that, but I just have a question about where does First Nations cultural value sit? Is it homogenized into this, or I just didn't see any impacts or recording of any First Nations interaction or anything like that with the bar graph or anything like that. So I'm just wondering about the language, because I'm thinking that now with that cultural value, because we're using that language down here, but it's a bicultural sense of the word, which is the incoming culture and the destruction that we have, and then we have the first culture, which kept it all pristine, because we knew the cultural value, the cultural and spiritual value. So I just wanted to flag that. That's all, I guess. I wanted to ask that question too. Does that include, or does that talk about us as well?
A really valid point that you've made, Carl. I'm highly aware of it, and it makes me cringe a little bit that it's so clunkily approached from my point of view. So I did say at the outset that the way that we've used the word culture is very broad. So it's not recognising specifically First Nations people, and I think that that's deserving of its own focus. But really what we were trying to do was find out from everybody who lives in that community how they feel about it. That's not to discredit the fact that First Nations people here were long before and certainly understood the importance of that environment and looked after it in ways that we've come in and really trashed it appallingly. I guess the intent of the study is simply to try and find a way that can express the concept of culture in a measurable form. It's not meant to diminish the role of First Peoples. Certainly in the some of the qualitative answers, the importance of First Nations and their understanding of the environment was mentioned a number of times. But in terms of who completed the survey, that simply was decided by who chose to respond to the questionnaire, either online or from those household surveys.
Yeah, and this was just done in the northern area?
Yes, because that Salt to Sea project that's funded through the Goyder Institute was for that particular stretch of coastline. And the physical part of that, the opening of the bund wall, was situated along that parcel of coast.
Yeah.
So it's definitely needs more work to make sure the voice of First Nations is part of the story, but I think that needs a different kind of methodology. It needs people who know how to the context and so forth. So I think it's an addition, but this was really a testing point to see whether that dynamic framework worked to capture people who live in the region, how they perceive that environment, and it's linked to the state government's blue carbon strategy, because they're all about co-benefits. And I think there's an opportunity to try and shore up conservation of this parcel of land against development, because there's uncertainty of what's going to happen once those mining releases, the evaporation ponds are let go. There's a big opportunity for development in the region. So I think it's like letting the state government know that people who live there and visit this place value it highly, and that there are wellbeing benefits derived from it. But there's another layer definitely to add.
Yvonne has a question. Dr. Andrew Lothian has done extensive work on creating assessment tools for assessing values of landscapes. How do your assessment methodology fitting in with his assessment methodology?
Yes, so I'm really glad that you asked that question, because when Andrew Lothian did his landscape assessments, these regions, this parcel of land north of Adelaide, gets very low ratings, because some of the things that make people appreciate landscape by looking at a picture, not by being in the landscape, but Andrew's methodology was to show people a whole sequence of different images and get them to rate the image. And images that rated highly had great diversity in the landscape. So, if you've got waterfalls and tall trees and there's a difference in height, and you can really differentiate the species of plants and stuff, people rate those landscapes highly. So I was saying that his methodology actually has a flaw for this particular environment, because people can't distinguish that importance and variety because it looks really homogenous. So this dynamic model, I think, of people actually visiting a place, being part of it, being in it and having a greater appreciation of it, offers a more authentic rating of cultural value.
I just have a question about the St Kilda mangroves and the terrible situation there. And I think where you're talking about is maybe above that area, but
well, it includes St Kilda, but it goes far beyond that. Yeah.
Well, so I know it's an ongoing horrible.
It's a disaster. Yes, it's terrible. Yeah, awful.
I hope somehow it could be resolved, but very, very difficult.
Different state government departments need to be talking to each other and acting on the problem.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the other people who should be recognised for all the hard work that they've done in this region is Perry Coleman and part of the Delta Environmental Consulting, because she's been advocating very loudly on behalf of this particular place for something to happen. So there are people working hard to try and encourage people to do the right thing.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Beverly. That was a very informative discussion. We're very pleased today to have Carl Winter-Telfer with us as Burka Senior Culture Man of Mullawera Mayana and Chair of Onkaparinga Council's First Nations People Advisory Group. He'll share the Dry Forest people's cultural wisdom and perspective on the Wash Pool, his grandfather's country. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks. I suppose where do I start? Growing up, I guess, with my mum, walking country all the time, and just from a young age, and just seeing the impacts constantly, but seeing the fights constantly that are lost. As you say about state departments and this, that, and everything else, and state governments and all that, all dependent on upon which way the pendulum swings. And for us, the blackfellas, we've just been pushed to the back of the bus on a whole range of different things, especially around protecting our sacred places, our deep cultural, spiritual places, and that's what Mum would often talk about: cultural and spiritual renewal. So, just a suggestion with that other story there, Beth, is to maybe talk about bicultural values. That includes us then, and brings us all together, because that's what the language we use, myself and Gavin down this way, Gavin Malone at L50K, Kanyanya Pillar. But we're trying to do that there now, which is regeneration, but also regenerating our culture, which is the First People's culture, because we haven't had a chance to actually really recover our. So I think with that space down there, especially when we're talking about the wash pool, very significant, of course, to us and to everybody else too. So we've been talking about different things, but there still needs to be the community coming together so we can actually sit down and actually have a decent conversation about that, because now it all comes down to who the right people are, the people that hold the wisdom and knowledge, to as well as hydrologists and everything else, and land care and planning and yucca groups and all that sort of stuff, and the community and the local council and the local community groups, obviously, is what I'm talking about, because we had a big achievement not long ago, and Peter can vouch for that, when Mum was up on the hill there too and co-signed a letter that was hand-delivered. I hand-delivered it to the Premier and stuff like that, and we sort of got to move on some things after 50 years, 50 years of talking about the significance of not just the wetlands, but what's right next to that, which is part of the Djibouti story and the peace law, and the constant encroachment and the constant, pushing to the side, or the dubbing down of our voices over a long time. Well, in the history of the country, it's still the same conditions that we're still in, really, because we don't have any country. And when we see, for me anyway, representing my clan group, when we see the signs of like Conservation Park, the word cultural should come before it, the cultural conservation, and that's it, because we know that the land, if we don't care for it and look after it and do the things that we need to do, what is culture? It's nothing without our environments, and we talk about that as well as in land, sea, and sky country. But we talk about that as well because our religion isn't written in a book; it's actually written in the land, inscribed in the landscape itself. And these are the sorts of things when we talk about people experiencing or the identity and those sort of capabilities. Well, we don't have any, and we sort of never have. So for me and the younger people that are coming up now behind, and all people now. I mean, there's just it just shows the crisis of our failed systems. And there's been failures on the blackfellow side and the whitefellow side. When you want to talk about governments and institutions and things like that, there's more attention given to construction and transport and those sorts of things than actually trying to figure out ways of offsetting those, carbon concrete and all this sort of stuff. There's none of that actually being talked about. And I think that with this in mind, there's opportunities for us to be engaged in those new economies, especially as, First Nations people, because we once benefited from the wealth of the land, but the wealth is still not common for us in this place they call the Commonwealth. So I think the governments, I don't think it matters which side is in there. It just needs to be mandated by the people and the community now to say this is enough. And we cannot have the little accidents hidden, and you just, you didn't hear about what happened down out there when they broke the seal down there with the salt lakes and all that, and why we've got all the mangroves all dead and da-da-da-da-da. It was all a bit of a hidden game for a little while. But nature can't hide the truth. And the truth in it for all of us is, because no one's talking or thinking about the next 7 generations or the 7 generations that have come before. It's all about right now, here and now. And I remember my mum talking about climate change 30-something years ago. And many people were talking about it that long ago, but nothing's been done. So I think, if we can gather, for me, if we can bring everybody together in and around this to have those wider conversations, deeper conversations about the whole coastline, Wonga is what we say in language, because we see it as one place. We don't see it as, compartmentalised through council boundaries or through electorates or anything like that. For us, it's a living, spiritual, cultural part of our well-being, mentally, spiritually, physically, you name it. So I guess listening to some of the stories, what do we want to do about that? What do we want to do about that now? Because we're basically in crisis. And COVID, it's created a lot of issues for people on a whole range of levels. The flooding that's going on is a clear indicator about where we're actually at with climate right now. So I just would like to try and talk to people about creating a movement to actually say, no, we don't want to have further development and impacts on everything that, we're trying to connect people with, which is nature. And it's not nature play, it's the play of nature. So I think for me, that place is really important, and continuing in carrying my mother's legacy, and for her granddaughters and grandsons and the other ones that are coming now. It's time that there needs to be, we have to fight together for these spaces, or else they'll all be gone. And they're disappearing, like someone said earlier, part all the wetlands and that deforestation, all that sort of stuff. They're just disappearing. There's been more activity while COVID's been going on, so it's under the guise of what? So I think on that and in that area of what the corporate understanding is of giving back or offsets or whatever it is, rights need to be given back, spiritual rights need to be given back, cultural rights need to be given back, not just to the people of the land, but the land itself. We don't want more development. The ground, the country, it just cannot keep supporting it. So the work that we do and the great work that we achieve together, sometimes, there's always something happening over there behind the fence. You know what I mean? When we're looking here and there's good things happening here, there's always something happening worse over there and worse over here and everything else. And all these things are connected across the whole country. We know these things. They're in our dreaming, they're in our songlines, they're in our traveling pathways over country, through country, and all those sorts of things. So how, I guess, how do we come together to really force those issues for the unborn children's futures, because they're the ones who are going to be looking at this moment, if there is a moment. So I'm up for just more conversation about this, and actually on country would be good, maybe at the fire, so we can talk about our cultural values together and actually do something about it, to make the change, because we haven't got any more time left now. So yeah, and the wash pool, I don't know what's going to happen with that. I know there's a lot of people involved, a lot of different groups and stuff involved. I just hope they're the right people, because it all comes down to the people, and listening to the land itself. And I think there's a great opportunity in this, to be able to share a wider story with the people, so that the authentic value of culture is critical to their whole being. But people just have to understand that we're part of the human family, just like us. So I think more discussion needs to be had, especially where the decision makers are involved, with the boards and the chairs and stuff like that, because the boards and the chairs, I don't see them at these places. I see the community at these places. I see the little people at these places. I see families and stuff like that place, and also putting in the accountability measures as well, because it's not just about consultation. Because for blackfellas, for us, we know what consultation is all about. Consultation for us is people coming to us already knowing what the outcome is, if you know what I mean. So the ticker box stuff is it's just got to stop now. And that's, yet again, talking about mum and her spirit of place and the Djibouti peace law, because if we can look after those places and bring that song back, well, then we're not just coming towards peace ourselves, us as the blackfellas, back to our birthright and our traditional human right, cultural right, spiritual right. We're actually bringing people to understand what that means on country too, that peace law fire there that everyone can be a part of. Because it's up to us. It's up to us, no matter which way the pendulum goes. We've got to find that common ground in the middle. And I think this is a great forum to begin more opportunities for more circles of meaning in the future, so we can bring all layers, all generations, and all the people to a better understanding of what the spirit of place holds. Now, I don't know if there's any questions, and I didn't prepare a presentation. I'm just speaking from my heart, I guess, because I was really happy to see that. Well, just getting that. Well, Mum missed the opportunity when she passed in September last year, to be there on the day that it was proclaimed. Yeah. So hopefully we can get more action, and more things done together, and hopefully it doesn't take 50 years to just get that done, because we know it's what, because it's just the right thing to do. So yeah, that's probably what I just wanted to share, and I just look forward to coming down and talking with the other groups down that way anyway, down in the southern area. And for me, the Ghana Miana is what I say, Miana, because of the history of the word, and people needing to know what that word means, and the constructs with native title that now under some other one, some law from somewhere else, that we're forced under in the squares. We all need to return to the circle. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be a part of, fighting for those places that we have left, and hoping that everybody else sees what that means for us, because if they're gone for us, well, then they're gone for everybody else as well. Yeah, what is the value of our cultural value?
Carl, I do have a question for you from Yvonne. She was thinking about government agency, councils, volunteer groups. What are they doing in consideration to evaluating cultural values of the Aldinga Wash Pool? So both the methodology that Bev stated and also what you've stated.
Yeah, well, what me and Gavin have created, we created back in 2015, 14, I think. Probably even longer than that ago. We came up with the term cultural mapping, and they're the things that their whole process actually is a study of everything. It's not just a cultural heritage management plan that just talks about archaeology and a bit of anthropology and stuff like that. This goes through all of the layers of time, and impacts and the story and this, that, and everything else. So everybody knows biculturally what the histories are, because I think that people don't have an understanding of that. Like, I know more about the European history and the city and Colonel Light and all those other players, and all the street names and everything than most white fellas, if you know what I'm saying, Now, why is that? Especially, it's an issue, but with the culture mapping, it informs and lays a foundation and a groundwork for everyone to understand, like, what is the spirit of that place? What is the meaning across all layers, across incoming culture, across first culture, or first peoples, and how we can come together to better, educated way from that process to make, decisions about what things we'd like to see as outcomes, So I guess with councils and those sorts of things, and it's really hard, because just talking about the political processes and what they actually represent are not our law. They're not our tribal sort of council, because we don't sit in squares, we sit in circles. And it's very hard, because with the squares that are the system that dominate us, you can get lost in the corners, and you and also get pushed into the shadows of those corners. So I think with that, when there's Green Adelaide and there's a process and there's a board and then there's kayak and it's all of that sort of stuff. I mean, there's things that have been a part of that whole system, outcome, native title, whatever it is, all of that heritage. I've seen it fail for a long time. I've seen people jump this way and jump that way and jump this way and jump that way. I haven't seen any long-term sustained people working really hard, like as First Nations people, to really go, nah, this St Kilda stuff, this is life work here now. This is recovery stuff, dedicating themselves, but also having the support and the resources from whatever it is, government, whatever, blah, 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 to actually be a part of that, to do that. I see only one person in my mind, and that's my mother, and I don't have a choice. I'm not saying that because it's my mother. I didn't have a choice. She chose me. But you know, all her life she never, you know, strayed from that path, you know, always trying to, and she'd get a bit angry in that too, but it wasn't anger, you know, it was frustration because she was trying to get people to listen. But, you know, maybe she said a few of those words that were introduced, you know, some of those swear words, you know, but people who swear, they say, are very intelligent. I think that she was misunderstood a lot. And so we're always, and I'm always talking about how do we turn a loss into a win. And I think with cultural mapping and introducing that as a first step around the cultural values, but all the other values that go along with that, it's hydrology is a part of that, geology is a part of that, even the place naming research is a part of that, the cultural reading of country, spiritual reading of country is a part of that. But it's also, you know, that bicultural understanding and history of place, you know. So I guess those things are being slowly introduced. There's a lot of cultural change that needs to happen within local government, within state government, and everywhere, because it's all a chairperson, treasurer, you know what I mean, blah blah approach. Just so you can be a body that is connected into the big mesh, you know, into the wheel, to make the machine. So we've just begun on that now, especially through the First Nations People's Advisory Group. The cultural mapping is going to start, but there's trials that are going to happen so that people can actually see the information, understand the information, see the country in a different way, feel the country in a different way, respond to that, but respond to an outcome that is suited best for the country, community, and everyone that's a part of that, which is the bicultural way of understanding. So it's taken a bit of time, but we're sort of chipping away at it. You know what I mean? It's like the Rock of Gibraltar, you know? We're just chipping away at it. And we're actually getting some traction on the ground now, especially with the council down this way here. You know, but still there are other people that will come in and claim space and say this and say that and scream at everyone and do all that sort of stuff, like, oh, and say, yeah, that's not the right person, this isn't the right person. But, you know, now it's time to throw everything on the table because we've got no time. And people talk about truth telling and that. Well, there isn't any. So it's time to tell the truth now and throw things on the table so we can really get some good things happening, just so we can start moving forward with this here. Because if we just keep, oh, you know, if someone's been told this or told that, no, I can't touch this, I can't make a decision. It's like, that's not good enough because everyone suffers then. And, you know, a methodology around that is just going, okay, if we've got that proven, we've got the circle and the square communicating with each other, well, then better things are going to come out of that. More change is going to come out of that. And more ways of consideration and understanding is going to come out of that as well. Because the only apparatus that we have at the moment for accountability is a RAP plan. And why should it be a RAP plan? Like reconciliation, what does that like word mean, really? We've had how many years of it? We've had a long time, but now people are finding the loopholes, those that aren't really for it, just to push it away and deny its real intent. You know, just like the statement from the heart, Uluru statement from the heart, you know, the intent, but then what comes with that? You know, so
sorry to interrupt you, Carl.
Yeah, sorry, I was just
two
talking
people
too
after
long
me,
there.
and you're very interesting, and I'm loving listening to you. I'd also just like to say how much appreciated and loved Georgina was to everybody that I've met, and what a loss her passing was. So I'd really like to just put that out there from all of us. Thank you for that.
That's right.
So I will move us on because we've got two speakers to go and only a little bit of time. Our next speaker is Ben Taylor from the Nature Glenelg Trust. Peter asked him before why it's not the Glenelg Nature Trust, and he said it sounded more like a G&T, like gin and tonic, so that's why. Many of us have bumped into him over the past year, and he's undertaken an important project on behalf of the Green Adelaide to examine the history of the wash pools modification since European colonisation and propose how we might move beyond this. Ben is a senior wetlands ecologist who's been working on wetland conservation, restoration, monitoring and management issues since 2004. He's been working recently across the Fleurieu Peninsula on swamp ecology. So thanks, Ben, and welcome to the presentation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Janine. So yeah, thanks very much for the invitation, Peter, to present today. Thanks to the other speakers. Thank you, Carl, for your welcome in Kaurna language. This work that I'm doing at the moment on the wash pool is funded through the Green Adelaide Board, and it's through their grassroots grant program. Before I go into detail about that, just to cover a little bit about who Nature Glenelg Trust are. We're a not-for-profit organisation, and there's a few points that describe what we do. But the key reason that I'm here and doing some work on the wash pool is because of our experience in the hydrological restoration of wetlands. We've done a lot of this type of work where we've taken wetlands that have been degraded through various means, particularly drainage in the past through agricultural practices, trying to remove water from the landscape as quickly and efficiently as possible. And we've sort of tried to turn the tide back and restore the way water moves through the landscape, is held in different places. And because the hydrology is so fundamental to the nature of wetlands, the vegetation they support, the species that are present in wetlands is very strongly influenced by the depth of water, the saltiness of the water, the duration that the water stays in the landscape, whether it's permanent, seasonal, ephemeral, these sorts of factors. So hydrological restoration is really, the hydrology of a wetland is really fundamental to everything else to do with the species and its ecology. Our project at the wash pool is to develop some restoration options for this wetland that are informed by Kaurna knowledge and aspirations, as much as we can tap into that knowledge and have those conversations, which we are endeavouring to do as much as we can. Obviously informed by ecological science and historical evidence, which is something that as ecologists, most of us in NGT are trained ecologists, but we now find ourselves ever more delving into archives and old documents and maps to try and piece together the past to help inform the future. And also, agreed by the various different parties that are involved in the wash pool. I'm very mindful of the fact that, I've only been working on the wash pool for 1 year. There's a number of people even here today who've been working on it for decades. And of course, there's tens of thousands of years of Kaurna cultural knowledge and history. So, we come along and have our little time with it. But I hope that we can provide some value to this ongoing process of understanding and better protecting and managing this wetland, which is obviously a very significant wetland for Kaurna people and for everyone. So I've been very lucky enough to obtain this map, and it's really thanks to Carl and his collaborator Gavin Malone, who have put me in contact with a chap called Chester Schultz, who's been doing some really interesting research, historical research on the Wollonga area. And Chester dug up this map, which was drawn by a chap called Richard Council in October 1839. Richard was part of a survey team mapping out the future land parcels of the Wollonga area, and in the process mapping some natural features as well. And as far as we know, this is probably not the whole story. There's some other maps from this time, but this may well be the very first detailed European style map of the wash pool, and it tells us some really interesting things. If you can see the line there with the 1000 written on it, that is what is now Button Road. It gives you a bit of a sense of the size of the washpool at this time. You can see that the inner shape of the washpool is described as saltwater lagoon. So to interpret that ecologically, it probably means an open water body without, reeds and rushes sticking up through it, but actually quite open, at least when it was full. Other accounts from the time tell us that the washpool used to dry in the summer. So the saltwater lagoon's central area probably was open water drying back to an open mud flat type of habitat during the summer, or late summer, early autumn. And then it's surrounded by this other band of ground which is described as swampy. That is probably an area of ground that went underwater for a briefer period each year, or perhaps not every year, and was probably vegetated with rushes and reeds and possibly Garnia tussocks, some of the species that are still around the edge of the washpool today, possibly salt marsh as well, samphires and things like that. Interestingly, the northern, there's an outlet here, but at the time of this map it appears that it's inactive, north of contemporary Button Road, whereas this southern arm extending to the sea, Mr. Council's drawn a bit of a gap in the sand dunes there, indicating that that was probably the active outlet of the washpool at this time. Another interesting point that you can see on the map, the word, it's a bit hard to read, but open plains immediately inland of the washpool, indicating that probably a treeless native grassland was the country immediately inland of the washpool. So if you take Mr. Council's maps and you lay them over the contemporary aerial photograph, this is what it looks like. Obviously there's been some significant changes. One thing is that there's an outlet channel now north of Button Road, and the outlet from October 1839 is no longer active. And we have a concrete weir at the location of this yellow star, which is actually the main feature controlling the water levels upstream in the washpool. So to show that in more detail, this is the concrete weir. I mean, I'm sure all of you have been here and seen this. The levels upstream in the washpool are controlled by this structure, and the surface, the crest of this weir is 2.64 metres AHT, or above sea level. And so when the wetland is at that level, i.e. it's effectively full, it is the size that you can see in this map here, the blue area. That is taken from using the digital topographic map of this area and using that 2.64 metres measurement. So you can see that that's much smaller than the washpool as observed by Richard Council in 1839. It's about, if you take the outer edge of Mr. Council's map, the washpool then was about 28 hectares in size, whereas this blue area here now today is around 7 hectares. So it's about a 75% reduction in surface area at full. Not to say that the washpool doesn't get fuller than this blue area sometimes when the water is flowing in fast and there might be a slope across the wetland, or the water spilling over the weir might actually be quite deep because the inflows are very high. But that's usually quite a brief situation, and it quickly returns back to this kind of level. So what has happened to change the washpool from this shape and size under Ghana management back in the early 1800s to what it is today? Well, I think broadly speaking, two things. Oh, by the way, I just put this photo in here just to show you that this is an aerial photograph taken on a day late last year, October last year, when we know that the water level in the washpool was about 2.64 metres AHD. So just showing the good correspondence between what we see on the ground and what that digital topographic map suggests about the size of the washpool today. But yeah, the key things that have occurred that have changed the size and shape of the washpool are firstly drainage. So the red lines on this map are drains that bring water into or through internally within the washpool, and those water courses, those drains were never there historically. In fact, the early maps don't show any surface streams flowing directly into the washpool, suggesting that there was a strong groundwater influence historically, possibly overland flow at surface but broad, not in defined watercourses, and possibly some seawater reverse flows back in at times. But anyway, this is what we have now. We have these red lines, these drains bringing water in. We also have these yellow, what I've mapped as yellow over here, drains that come off the Silver Sands housing development. That water actually bypasses the washpool and joins the water that spills over the concrete weir at this location where we have the green outlet channels. So that takes the combined flows from the Silver Sands area and the broader washpool catchment, merges them together and sends them out through this channel out to sea. And the effect of that is that the size of the washpool has been reduced because the water can't get to the same higher level that it used to get to before it started to spill through the dunes. The other thing that appears to have happened is sedimentation. Back in 2000, a geologist called Ian Dyson did a whole series of core samples throughout the washpool, and I've got his locations here. Each yellow dot is a location where he did a core sample through the bed of the washpool, and those numbers are the depth in metres of sediment that has accumulated on the bed of the washpool since colonisation, according to Mr. Dyson. So you can see that there are some parts of the wetland that there hasn't been very much sedimentation, but there are others where there's been quite a lot. We've got a number of 0.9 metres here. And we know that up in the catchment, up in at the base of the Wollonga escarpment, there are big, deep erosion gullies that have happened as a consequence of poor land management, and a lot of that sediment would have ended up getting transported down to the washpool through these channels, through these drains, and has been deposited there. And to look at that in another way, this is the digital elevation model where the darker blue areas are the lower lying ground and the brown is the more elevated ground. And interestingly, you can see this line through the washpool here that is in fact an old drain. We know it was a drain because we have quite good documentary evidence in the archives of when it was cut, which was in the early 1950s, and for what purposes and who did it. Was the local farmers trying to get water off the washpool more effectively. But what's happened is that all it's ended up doing is allowing more sediment. Well, the drain has become so silted up that it's actually formed more like a bund today. There's so much sediment has been deposited. So you can look at the digital topographic model and try and work out what kind of water level the washpool maybe used to get to more typically by lining up Mr. Council's 1839 map with the contemporary DEM, digital elevation model. And without going into too much detail, if you raise the level from its maximum, from its current maximum of 2.64 up to about 3.04 by about, so raising it by about 40 centimetres, you get a reasonable alignment with Mr. Council's original shape, at least along this south eastern edge here, where we don't think the sedimentation and other things have changed the shape of the washpool too much. So that might be a kind of a level to aim for in a restored or hydrologically restored wetland. But you can also see that there's parts of the northern part of the washpool that don't get wet at that level, and that's probably a lot to do with the sedimentation. And there's also some parts of ground that are outside the original washpool that do get wet. Down here around the bottom of Button Road, we're not quite clear why. It might be because there's been sand excavated from that area. There's some mention of sand mining for the construction of Maiponga Reservoir from this area, and we're looking into that, trying to get a bit more detail about where the sand was mined from to see if it can explain why this is lower now than it might have been historically. The other factor, of course, is there's water getting very close to and up close to the level of the properties of Silver Sands, which is, obviously a big challenge for hydrological restoration. So what could be done, this is just, we're not saying this is, locked in by any means. This is just a suggestion thrown out there for others to consider, is that a levee could be built to separate the water in the main body of the washpool from the Silver Sands development and this bit of low ground that still needs to take the Silver Sands stormwater out to sea unhindered. So that might look something like that, where the yellow drains that drain Silver Sands could continue to be effective and continue to take water through this combined outlet channel, but you could hold the water higher in the washpool itself. So in 10 minutes, there's a little hot summary of some thinking. There's a lot more to potentially say, but thank you for listening and happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Ben?
Sorry. No, I was just going to say that's great work that Ben's been doing. So I just wanted to say that basically. I mean, I'm pretty sure we need, more time to have more conversations, So yeah, I just wanted to say it was great. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks very much, Carl. And yeah, I look forward to us talking a bit more about all of this in in the months ahead. Good to chat some more.
Thanks, Ben. That was fascinating. Peter Laffin, last but not least, has been involved in lots of projects in the region since he and Imelda moved here in 2003. Infamous is an understatement for advocating the removal of vehicle access to beaches as part of the Aldinga Bay Coast Care. He's been advocating for the washpool ever since the late Carol Shields introduced him to it soon after he arrived. He lives in Silver Sands, just a couple of streets away from the washpool. So thanks, Peter.
And thanks for everyone's patience. I just want to say to Carl especially, thank you for everything that you've given us and the story that's opening up in new directions for us now through what you're saying and offering, and to everyone else who's been patiently waiting as well as we've blown our time. I speak as one who's been taught by a great many others, especially Nunki Burker, Georgina Williams, Yambo Katanya, who was my Ghana teacher over 19 years and the bearer of the spirit of Jabruki, which has carried us to this important stage in learning how to live respectfully and well on Ghana Yurta. I want to briefly recap the journey of those 19 years I've been involved and to look at some of the next steps in this journey. We can only glance at these today, but perhaps they can be guideposts to how we move forward. So, the biggest fight for the washpool was in the 1980s when it was slated for development as a marina. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the local community, led by Georgina and many environmental groups, was trying to prevent the approval of the Sunday estate on the northern boundary of Aldinga Scrub. By 2004, this fight had been lost, leaving many people demoralised and divided about the future for the precious places that we prize so much. Towards the end of 2004, a large gathering was held in the then Aldinga Library, bringing together representatives from all these groups to take stock and consider what next. Those represented included Georgina, Friends of Willunga Basin, Willunga Environment Centre, Southern Eco Alliance, Aldinga Bay Coast Care, Aldinga Bay Residents Association, Willunga Trees for Life, and the Conservation Council of South Australia. It was a wonderful meeting of minds and hearts that led to two decisions. Firstly, that the proper recognition and protection of Aldinga Washpool should be the focus of our efforts, and that this meant including it in the protected areas system as a conservation park, joined to the existing Aldinga Scrub Conservation Park. And secondly, that we needed to recognise the connections, especially through hydrology, both upstream and downstream. From this developed the notion of a greater Aldinga conservation zone, combining the scrub, the washpool, Aldinga and Sellex beaches, Aldinga Bay, and Aldinga Aquatic Reef, already a marine protected area. So began a new phase that has culminated this year in the declaration of Aldinga Washpool and the creation of a new Aldinga Conservation Park, awaiting full renaming in Ghana Wara, Ghana language. As many of you know, it's been a case of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. As first Onkaparinga Council developed the Washpool Management Plan, it got shelved for lack of financial support from state and federal governments, and years when nothing seemed to be happening. But the spirit of collaboration between community, state government and Onkaparinga Council, and maintaining clear focus as a unified community on our goal has succeeded. Along the way, we have made a lot of effort to introduce the Aldinga and Sellex communities to the wonders of this ephemeral wetland with its rich cultural history and ecological significances, and been supported by key leaders in local and state government, including politicians at both local and state level. So we are now at a new beginning with co-management of the National Parks and Wildlife Service and Ghana leaders. For us whitefellas, it is an opportunity to deepen our learning about how to belong here, how to allow ourselves to be claimed by the spirit of Jabruki. We can contribute to restoring the connections between the scrub and washpool, especially for water, wildlife and habitat. We can envisage the washpool as a centre for wetland learning, the diverse biota and their life stories, and how it might adapt to sea level rise, storm surges and other impacts of climate change. There are a host of issues to be taken into account as we move forward. The most important of these is the resolution of outstanding issues between the state government and Onkaparinga Council, including handing over of some land parcels in the washpool, how the council responsibilities outside the washpool boundaries can foster the restoration of the washpool, and most significantly, the finalisation of a stormwater management plan for the Silver Sands catchment and funding from the state government to implement it. This has been on the drawing boards for more than 6 years without any resolution. With Ben's project moving to recommendations for hydrological restoration, the spotlight needs to be put on how upstream management of water flows can be slowed down. It is heartening to hear of moves afoot to convert the drains between Main South Road and the washpool into biodiverse wildlife corridors with swales retaining the water, which is some of the conversation taking place within council at the moment. Up to now, Friends of Aldinga Scrub and a range of individuals and groups have been caring for the wash pool through weed and feral animal control, with lots of support from council and what was the Natural Resources Management. We await the guidance from Ghana and national parks as to how this might look going forward. It's going to be critical to involve the communities of Silver Sands and Selix beaches. I think there is a need for a more deliberate approach to engaging with adjacent private landholders in order to help them understand how important the wash pool is, the responsibilities that come with being its neighbours, and perhaps how the key aspects of Ghana culture and ecological values can grow outwards so that the dynamic cultural and natural ecology can breathe more fully, not constrained to its present boundaries. Immediate issues that have to be addressed include traffic calming of Norman Road, where once again a kangaroo was killed last week. It's unbelievable that the simple expedient of reducing the speed limit for a mere 600 metres and physical measures that recognise the movement of wildlife has not progressed in many years of campaigning, as federal road laws are invoked as a stumbling block. Perhaps we can ask our Mawson candidates in the next election to commit to resolving this as soon as possible. The exclusion of horses, dogs and motorbikes has to be made clear to the local community and enforced as fully as possible. And continuing research on the ecology, the movement of wading birds from far afield and climate impacts is part of the work of restoration. So now is a good time to look at that second goal we set back in 2004, of developing the concept of a Greater Aldinga Conservation Zone. It's an ugly name for the unique configuration of ecosystems that make it up. The sandy scrub forest, an ephemeral wetland, the pebble banks protecting the wash pool from greater incursions of seawater, the exquisite Silver Sands beach, Aldinga Bay with its seagrasses, and of course, Aldinga Aquatic Reef, which has been protected for its rich intertidal and subtidal flora and fauna since 1971. The flow of water across the land and seascapes is the unifying factor that means each is dependent on the water quality and amount further upstream. Together, they make up a remarkably diverse and rich representation of marine and coastal habitats. But until they are managed in an integrated way, we will fail to recognise their full value. The biggest obstacle is a lack of a comprehensive coastal management plan, not just for this end of Council's responsibilities, but the whole 30 kilometres it looks after. So far, there have been only piecemeal attempts looking at cliff stability, erosion, and beach recession from storm surges. Consequently, the current practice of car access to the beaches is pitted against the success of hooded plover conservation programs. The key to changing this is to recognise that the beach is a rich ecosystem in itself that we need to use responsibly and with attention to our impacts. A second car-free zone, the length of the wash pool, would acknowledge that the wash pool's protection needs to extend to its surrounds. There isn't a neat line between the two. We need to stretch our thinking upstream too, and Sally Shaw, who's participating, has been important in trying to get the constructed Hart Road wetland really integrated within our thinking and care as part of a local community. So that's part of the management of hydrology that stretches up to the top of the Wollonga Range. And the range to reef is the concept that seeks to capture the whole landscape that brings water and silt from the hill's face to the wash pool and beyond. Biodiversity McLaren Vale is doing a fantastic job across the Pedlar, Maslin and Wollonga Creeks catchments, restoring local ecosystems. Wollonga Hills Face Land Care Group is addressing the very real threats to the wash pool in the Silver Sands catchment, with silt being carried from the Hills Face to the wash pool and coastal environment. And that's some of the work that the Biodiversity McLaren Vale is doing in the region. I'd like to conclude with a suggestion that the time is right. It's kind of following on partly, I hope, in sympathy with what Carl was talking about, circles of conversation, to convene sometime this year, COVID willing, a consultation that brings together Ghana, community environmental projects, government and industry across the Wondershare Basin to assess the progress we have made in protection of Ghana Yurta and how we might move forward in the spirit of the UN's Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, a global rallying cry to heal the planet. Gavin and Carl's bicultural regeneration at Lot 50 is in the heart of the basin, is already leading the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that. Are there any questions for Peter before we go on?
Just want to say, yeah, thank you, Peter. That was excellent. Very, very helpful. Yeah, Hart Road Wetland is a tricky situation. Unfortunately, the water is a utility for the council and they are planning to sell it, or have been trying to for some years, or certainly last year and certainly this year. So yeah, I don't know how to deal with that issue. It's very complex.
Oh, Peter, I just wanted to say thank you for, honouring Mum. And in that sense, I just wanted to reiterate, when we're talking about Ghana, me, and we need to change the language around that sort of stuff too. But also just talking about the differences between political authority, administrative authority, and cultural authority. Political authority, well, we know that circle of time or squareness of time, which is usually 4 years. Administrative authority, same sort of thing, but cultural authority doesn't end. So I just wanted to, place that, I guess, in your minds, in ensuring, like what I was saying before, that the right people are sitting around the right round table, maybe, or sitting on country at that fire, because there's more education around that and respect that needs to be, I guess, thought of in that sense. And now with Mum and her passing the story on to me and her grandchildren, we're there. I'll make the fire and everyone can come and sit and we can talk about all this sort of stuff together, because, yeah, happy to start that circle and bring everyone that's here, but everyone that's there together.
Thanks again, Carl.
Thanks, Carl.
And could I just say that I forgot to mention Matt Farrell, who's here, has been stretching our thinking to go from Sellex down to Maslin and look at how we might rewild and rewood the spaces that are available and kind of grow the wash pool and the scrub in that way too.
Thanks, Peter. Carl, I'd just also like to say that I think you're already well and truly on that journey. You're working with young people out at Lot 50, and now you'll be working with our Yakka group going forwards for a bit. So I think you're well and truly opening the doors to conversation and sharing going forwards. Okay, so I'd like to thank everyone for taking part today. I hope it's been enlightening and rewarding for you. If you missed anything or you want to see it again, or you know somebody else who missed it and would like to look at it, it'll be available via our website after I've picked up all the cuttings off of the floor and edited it. And I really appreciate your patience. This is the first time I've ever done a forum on Zoom, so I'm hoping it'll still turn out okay. But yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for making me make a leap into the unknown and find something new to do. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Janine.
Thanks, Janine.
You're welcome, everybody. Thank you.
Nakara.